Smalls. I suppose you don't even know who the babe is either. It's plugged. What? Chewing tobacco?
Backy, man.
What do you do with it? You're killing me, Smalls.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. I thought we would take a little look back see at something that almost happened not that long ago. It was called 5G, Generation 5, Dan Didio's big initiative that was going to be the driving force behind DC Comics until this day. It turns out he was let go prior to this thing becoming a reality. They have, they reshaped it into Future State. Apparently, Superman and the Authority was also supposed to be a part of that. And so we're getting bits and pieces of it, what we've never actually seen what it was. Interesting enough, James Tynion, the man at DC Comics, the man behind Batman, one of the hottest writers in all of comics, when he got word about what 5G was going to be, he started making plans. He was still a DC exclusive creator, but he had started making plans for stuff to work on. So he didn't actually have to work on 5G because he didn't like the initiative either. So I went to his Empire of the Tiny Onion newsletter, and this is what he had to say about the time of 5G, his experience with it, and the reasons that he had gone out of his way, created some new stuff. And we're specifically talking about DC versus vampires for him to work on while everyone else did 5G. And this is from his newsletter. I hinted at a project that I refer to as Project Teeth. At that time, I thought my run at Batman was going to end at issue number 100, and that would have been the 5G initiative was going to kick off after that. And after a few conversations, I realized that I didn't want to participate in what was cooking up for the mainline DCU on the other end of 100. That was something that we kind of knew. James Tynion was on board to finish after Tom King, going to finish it up at issue 100. We were going to go into 5G, and then the Batman writer was going to be John Ridley. With Luke Fox was the rumor. It's turned out to be Jace Fox, but I guess that was changed after the fact. But something weird happened along the way, and we'll get to that. So once Tynion got the details, even though it was on Batman, he's like, all right, this is a short-term gig. I need to have something to work on that isn't 5G because I'm not all that interested. The entire publishing initiative was being cooked in-house with the goal of having writers execute a vision they didn't get to contribute much toward. I tried to see how flexible it was going to be and quickly realized that it wasn't going to be all that flexible. I wasn't interested in writing other folks' ideas, but I had signed a DC exclusive contract that was going to keep me running almost a year after I was done with Batman 100. He'd already had Nice House on the Lake approved, so I knew I'd be able to work on that, but I still had one slot in my exclusive contract to fill, so what was I going to do? So he's stuck in a rock and a hard place. He's going to be finishing up Batman 100. That was going to be his run. He was looking over at 5G, which apparently the creators themselves were going to have little to no input on. He was, whatever, I guess Dan Didio and some of the editors, and I imagine a couple of key creators came up with what 5G was going to be, was what you had to execute, which sounds like a terrible idea. If you don't have buy-in from the creators, how are you going to produce anything good? This is a creative industry. You can see why Future State sucks so bad, or half of Future State sucks so bad, and the rest of it was mostly mediocre except for a couple standouts. So we went and thought up DC versus Vampires, which is going to be somewhat in the vein of Deceased. And he says, I wrote a light breakdown of the 12-issue run, and I had it already in my back pocket for when I finished Batman 100 and left the book. But then Batman doubled in sales in 6 months, 5G didn't exist anymore, and all my creator-owned books were doing so well that I wasn't going to seriously consider dropping any of them. This is good to be James Tynion, right? You doubled sales on Batman. You got the full-time gig. The 5G thing you didn't want to work on was no more anyway. And essentially, he got a few months to catch things up with Jorge Jimenez and get things working. It's good to be James Tynion, and very fortuitous and very smart that he didn't go and waste his time on 5G. Unfortunately, we did have Future State, which was, I don't know, it was better than it should have been, but it still wasn't all that good. And we're still moving towards Future State or the 5G universe. that Didio sort of had envisioned, obviously with a little bit more creator input this time. Now that we've heard from James Tynion on why he wasn't all that interested in doing DC 5G Generation 5, let's look a little bit into some of the details that have been emerging, and these are from Bleeding Cool, so take them with a grain of salt. Although a lot of the basic details, general stuff that they were reporting on 5G was pretty accurate. They were certainly throwing some inflammatory things into those basic details to get people to click on articles. But I've distilled it into some of these details, and we'll talk about some of the information that came out. Obviously, they were showing the full timeline of Dan Didio's plans for the first, second, third, fourth generation like timeline that he'd set up. And Generation 5 was going to be just like a jump ahead several years, where Batman was going to be in his 50s, Superman was going to be in his 50s, Nightwing in his 40s, and John Kent would be 23, Damian Wayne 18. I guess it was supposed to be kind of like Age of Apocalypse, but it was going to be a lot longer. I still think there was an end date. It was going to be something like 6-9 months. I don't think it was going to be indefinite. Like, this wasn't going to be the DC universe like forever. But it's still a little bit different. You know, Age of Apocalypse obviously was only like, was that like 3 months before they went back to the current timeline. But essentially, after Dark Knight's death metal ended, we were going to skip right into Generation 5. And we'll specifically talk about the plans for John Kent and Damian Wayne here, because I think they're really strange. DC Comics is doing everything in their power, or they think they are, to create characters that can bring in new readers. Specifically, they are concentrating on like the Teen Titans, which makes sense. You got Teen Titans Go, which generally speaking speaks to a younger audience, and they've seen some successes with their Raven, Beast Boy, some Nightwing type stuff. Obviously, we just saw I Am Not Starfire release. That one probably didn't get the reaction that they're wanting, but they have two characters that are ready made for a young audience, and I don't know what they were thinking when they aged John Kent up. John Kent and Damian Wayne are like the perfect team for a young audience. The Super Sons was fantastic. You had two characters, they played off each other well, diametrically opposed as to kind of like their worldviews, but they're best friends. And you got to see a lot of character growth, a lot of really good conflict within the characters as they solve things together and leaning on each other's strengths and having to admit when they're wrong. And those are the kind of things that you need in a nice team book, you know, the good family dynamics. Of course, they did age up John Kent, and in the case of Generation 5, they would have been aged up even more, and we would have seen John Kent, you know, go to being the full-time Superman, which we saw in Future State. You know, Clark Kent went to Warworld. John Kent was the Superman of the Earth, and we're seeing it right now. We're about to have Superman, Son of Kal-El, John Kent as Superman, as Clark goes to Warworld. Just was like the original plan. But the plans for Damian Wayne were going to be a little bit different. Now, we do know that the new Batman, the next Batman, ended up being Jace Fox. The original rumors were that it was going to be Luke Fox, who was Batwing. According to Bleeding Cool, it was going to be Luke Fox, but they made a change once 5G was kind of scrapped. They were repurposing it as Future State, and Tynion wasn't leaving Batman at issue 100. He was going to continue on, and it became Jace Fox. But when it was going to be Luke Fox, according to this, Damian Wayne was going to become very jealous that he had ascended to the cowl instead of Damian himself. And that was going to, let's just say, bring out his grandfather's side in him. The inner Ra's al Ghul was going to come out of Damian Wayne, and he was going to become the big bad villain for DC Comics. And the comparison in the article is that John Kent was going to be Professor X to Damian Wayne's Magneto. And it makes sense. Dan Didio has been trying to remake DC Comics, or had been, into Marvel Comics for quite some time. We've seen many efforts to change the DNA of the DC Comics universe to more mimic what had been successful at Marvel Comics. And that would be the new dynamic between the two. And Damian Wayne would be working alongside Leviathan. That was created by well, is it Leviathan the villain or Leviathan the group? Obviously, Leviathan the group's been around quite some time. His mom had a part to do with that. I imagine it's Leviathan the group. So that one didn't have anything to do with Bendis. But he would be a part of Leviathan, leading them, and would be the big bad in opposition of John Kent. And those two would be fighting. Why you would take a dynamic and a relationship like John Kent and Damian Wayne that has so much potential to be such a big draw for new readers into DC Comics, has such potential to make so much money, cashola for DC Comics, I'll never know. And not just DC Comics, but Warner Media. Marvel has a ready-made superhero for a new generation. Not that Peter Parker isn't still going to be a draw, but Miles Morales is sitting there, and there's been success with them. Obviously, it's not Marvel Studios that was able to cash in on that, at least in the animated movie. That was Sony. But that character draws in a new audience, and that's what Marvel Comics wants. DC Comics has these characters ready. The Super Sons, John Kent, Damian Wayne. They're mantles that people understand. Everybody knows who Robin is. Certainly everybody knows who Superboy, Superman is. They have the lineage. People will be able to relate to them. You get some cameo appearances by their fathers as they're going through their adventures. And it's ready-made to be very successful as an animated feature, as a big video game property, or even a live action feature eventually. Now, I don't believe this is why Dan Didio specifically was fired. I imagine once the heads at Warner Media started getting wind of what 5G Generation 5 was going to be, they weren't all that happy, because it was essentially going in direct opposition of all the things they were creating, in their other mediums. From what I understand, the reason that he was giving his pink slip rather unceremoniously. We do know that he went into work. He was on the message boards and stuff like he normally would have been, like Facebook groups. He was called in the offices, and that was it. So it was kind of out of the blue. From what I understand, that was because there was a lot of infighting and politicking, and there were HR complaints about what was going on at DC Comics. And that's why ultimately Dan Didio was let go. It probably should have been for stuff like this. And certainly he'd been trying to do these sort of things with DC Comics. We saw it in 5G. Very successful. Initially, people grew tired of it. As soon as he had an opportunity to move away from Rebirth with Dark Knight's Metal, he went right away with it and just kind of scrapped the idea and started moving towards this kind of stuff. Now, I do want to have a conversation with Aaron Lopresti, who obviously had a relationship or has a relationship with Dan Didio, worked at DC Comics for a long time with him. He has a different opinion and a different view of Dan. Obviously, from an employee perspective, my view is from a reader perspective, a customer perspective. And I just, you just think about the damage that's been done to the marketability of John Kent and Damian Wayne, and what would have been done if they had followed through with this plan to make Damian Wayne just an irredeemable villain. Damian Wayne's been through a lot of stuff. He was essentially raised in the League of Shadows. He died. He was resurrected in the Lazarus pit. He has an ego about him. But I think one of the things a lot of people like the attitude and everything, but we want to see Damian Wayne fully redeemed. And, be a good guy. I don't think anybody ever wants to see. Well, somebody wants to see Damian Wayne to be the ultimate bad guy at the end, but I don't know. A vast majority of people, certainly the ones that enjoy Super Sons, which should be a huge moneymaker for DC Comics, and they completely dropped the ball on, don't want to see Damian Wayne and John Kent as the number one good guy and the number one bad guy in the DC universe. And you can see why James Tynion was right to say, you know what, I'm not all that interested in 5G. You're not going to let me do the things that I want to do. You know, you're going to be dictating the stories, and I just don't like the direction anyway. So what could have been DC 5G Generation 5 is probably the what if DC absolutely dropped the ball on a monumental level and just threw everything away. Obviously, they've been trying to salvage things for quite some time. Future State. Now we're in Infinite Frontier. Sounds like we got another crisis on the horizon as far as DC Comics. But I'm glad they didn't go in this direction. And, you know, what might have been the death of DC Comics, who knows? So that's what we got today. Thank you so much for visiting me. And we'll be talking about something a little bit later. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.